Okay, I hear a lot of people, a lot of families say that they fought this for 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. I've watched it for 25 years, and I've seen huge changes in what's occurred. And when I first came in, and I went to law school late in life, my family had been in the restaurant business, I'd worked through that, and I just decided to do something new, so I went to law school. I became a prosecutor. Prosecuted domestic violence and child abuse. My very first jury trial was a young 2.5-year-old whose head had been crushed, basically. So, you know, I got into private practice, and I started helping families. And at first, and this is 25 years ago, you couldn't get CPS to do anything. They wouldn't do anything. They would never investigate. They would never take a child. They didn't know what to do with sex abuse. They wouldn't do anything. And so we're talking about mid-90s. And then I didn't know it at the time, but in 1997, the Clintons helped push through the Adoption and Safe Families Act, ASFA it's called. And what ASFA did is ASFA created an incentive on the head of every child to put that child into the homes of strangers and adopt them out, erasing the child's entire identity, their entire past, generational genocide. And I'm going to be honest with you, when I first saw that come up, I thought it was a pretty good idea, and let me tell you why. Because Tennessee, along with several other states, were under consent decrees from federal lawsuits, federal class action lawsuits that had been filed because children had literally been lost in the foster care system for years. They didn't even know how many children were in foster care. This is, of course, before electronics, before computers. They probably had them on a Rolodex. They didn't know where the children were. And so they were under these consent decrees, and children were lost in the system, and then they incentivized adoption. Sounded like a good idea. I've gone back, I've looked at the legislative history, I've looked at the arguments that were made in Congress when this occurred, and there were a few people who said, you know, this may not work out so well. And then I started noticing changes over the next 10 years from 1997 to 2007. I started seeing the changes in what once was an agency who wouldn't do anything to more and more and more overzealous prosecution of families and children. More and more and more. And I began to wonder what was happening. And then I started seeing medical kidnapping. And the first case I had with a tiny baby with a fracture, of course, they came after him right away. This child, first one was a little fracture on their knee, right below their knee. And the child was 7 months old. Mom had been folding the clothes. He had rolled off the bed and he'd hit his leg. They said the only way, CPS said the only way the child could have gotten that fracture is if she would have picked that child up by the leg and swung him around her head. The next one I had was a rib fracture. They call it multiple rib fractures at various stages of healing, right? And they say now that the only way that can occur is if a baby is crushed with both hands by a parent. But let me tell you what they don't look at. They don't look at osteopenia prematurity. They don't look at vitamin D deficiency. They don't look at calcium deficiency. They don't look at the changes in the parathyroid hormone. They don't look at the fact that small infants' bones break incidentally. And when they're at various stages of healing and they're all fractures and not a single rib in those babies, and I'm talking about 3-month-old babies who were born premature, and when not a single one of those ribs are popped, they're all just a fracture, somebody should be taking a look at that. But no, the child abuse specialty of doctors, which was created by the AMA in 2009, now has an interest in finding child abuse. And they don't bring in radiologists anymore to talk about it. They don't bring in neurologists and endocrinologists to talk about what could be wrong with this baby. They let the child abuse specialist, who is often on the payroll on some way or another of this Child Protective Services agency, come into court and opine that the only way it could occur is child abuse. Not a single witness, not a single bruise on the child's body. All the family members say that they always seem like good parents. That's medical kidnapping. And then I saw it become increasingly more and more and more. And mental health became an issue. And we have a law in Tennessee that says if you're mentally incompetent to raise a child, they don't even have to prove anything else. They don't even have to prove that you willfully didn't care for that child. They can just say you're too mentally incompetent, which flies in the face of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And they don't like it when I bring that up in court. I started fighting them more and more ferociously. Because when I first came into it and I tried to get them to do something and they wouldn't do something, I'd push and I'd push and I'd push them. And then there was a period of time where I actually could work with them. And I could say, you know, this